Today's reading comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." Friends, God is still speaking. May our hearts remain open to listen and understand.
Would you pray with me, please? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your presence, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When today's story began, she already had 2 children, Aaron and Miriam, who kept her busy enough. She was grateful beyond words that they at least had been born before Pharaoh got it into his head that Hebrew babies, the boys anyway, were a danger and should not be allowed to survive. If you heard last week's reading, you'll remember the command he sent to the midwives first and then to the whole populace that all Hebrew boy babies should be thrown into the Nile. When she found that she was pregnant again, she must have prayed harder than ever in her life that the baby would be a girl, that she would be spared the fate prescribed. If the child were born a boy, she knew that the midwives would do what they could to protect them, would say, "The baby came too fast before we arrived. We simply didn't know a boy had been born." But Pharaoh had made that edict public, and she knew there would be no hiding if she had another son. It was bad enough already with Aaron, still a child, but already being mistaken for a grown man, seen as suspicious and threatening, no matter how sweet and baby-faced he really was. Imagine if she had another boy now. Some neighbor, scared for their own skin, would call the cops and turn her in, and Pharaoh's people would come and, well, she couldn't bear to think about it too much. And then the baby arrived, and he was beautiful and alive and whole, and she forgot everything else for a minute because he was so good, every inch of him so perfect. How could anyone see this child and think he was dangerous? How could anyone see this child and call him a threat? How could anyone take her baby and throw him in the Nile? But the midwives brought her back to earth. "You can hide him for a while," they said, "but not forever. They will make you put him in the river eventually. You have to make a plan now." So make a plan she did. Like so many mothers before her and after, she looked a desperate situation in the face, and when she couldn't find a way, she made one. Pharaoh's order said she had to put that baby boy in the Nile, but it didn't say how or where. So she snuck down to the river whenever she could get away, her sleeping baby wrapped on her back. She walked every inch of its banks, found the places where you could wade right into the water, learned where it was too steep or too slippery to pass. She watched how the current eddied and turned, where it flowed gently and where it was turbulent. She dared to explore near the palace and discovered the place concealed by tall reeds where Pharaoh's daughter and her attendants came down to bathe. This gave her an idea. And so, for weeks, she would sneak back to that place. She learned the hours of the day when the princess would appear. She mapped the area upstream. She calculated how long it would take for an object set afloat to make its bobbing way down to the maidens below. She practiced by dropping leaves and twigs into the river like a child playing poo sticks until she knew just where and when to release them so they would arrive at her intended destination. She brought Miriam along sometimes, sent her closer to the princess than she dared go herself, knowing that children are granted more leeway than grown-ups can expect. Miriam charmed Pharaoh's daughter, first smiling shyly, then graduating to friendly waves, even eventually exchanging a few words of greeting. At least now the mother knew that young woman was not predisposed against Hebrew children, in spite of her father's ruthlessness. In the evenings, she worked at waterproofing. She wove a cradle basket out of papyrus, smeared it with resins to seal up the cracks, packed it with the softest things she could afford to part with, and she rocked that baby in the cradle basket so that when the time came for him to take his river voyage, at least the vessel would smell like home. She sang to him in his native tongue, whispered God's name in his ear, told him how much he was loved, so that even if her plans went awry, even if that floating basket was the last she saw of him, he would carry that truest truth indelibly inscribed in the depths of his heart. 3 months went by. In this way, the baby was growing, and she knew that soon he would be too big for that carefully constructed, waterproofed, cushioned basket. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone discovered her secret. She knew she couldn't put it off any longer. So on that fateful morning, she took Miriam with her and the baby in his basket. She made her daughter rehearse her lines again on the way to the river, even though they had done it 1,000 times before. What will you say to the princess, sweetheart? Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? She found a spot, that spot she had long ago chosen. She sent Miriam ahead to her lookout post. Then she uttered a prayer to all that is holy. She whispered one last benediction in his ear. She slipped her pinky finger out of the firm grasp of that tiny fist, and she swallowed hard, and she set that little ark afloat in the river. The current didn't fail her. Pharaoh's daughter made her entrance right on cue. Miriam remembered her lines and delivered them with perfect innocence. And the princess played her part admirably, too. She did not call the palace guards, Egyptian 911, to dispose of that undesirable infant. She did not assume that he would be better provided in her orbit, in a palace nursery among the royal babies, removed from all connection with his origins. No, she respected his community and his culture. She trusted the women of his family, and she even found a way to direct resources from Pharaoh's own coffers. Resources, by the way, that were surely generated in no small part by the labor of the enslaved Israelites. She found a way to direct those resources to support the baby and his family's flourishing. Furthermore, she recognized that the work of caretaking and homemaking has value and ought to be treated as such, when so often, now as then, the labor that often falls to mothers goes unnoticed and certainly uncompensated. It all went off without a hitch, better even than she could have hoped, and Moses' mother wept for joy as her son nestled back into her arms with his death sentence lifted, with a new lease on life, with her family whole again. She had months, years to teach him who he really was, to plant him so deeply in the stories and love of his people that even when he was transplanted, as she knew he would have to be, he would never lose those roots. Even when he became a child of the palace, a member of Pharaoh's own family, he would never forget who his kinfolks were. Now, when I learned this story back in Sunday school, I learned it as a series of seeming coincidences that must be a sign of divine intervention. It must have been God's will that Moses would be saved from drowning, raised by his mother, and then join the royal family. Otherwise, how could you explain the way the basket just happened to wash up in the exact place and at the exact moment when Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe? How could you explain that the princess decided to adopt him, that his sister just happened to be there, that his mother just happened to be recruited as a wet nurse? It was too unlikely to be random. It must have been the hand of God. Now, as you've heard, I imagine it a little differently, more as the brilliant strategic design of a mother trying to save her child's life, with the cooperation of a woman of privilege. But I see divine intervention no less in this version of the story than in the non-coincidental coincidences. For God is surely at work whenever a mother makes a way out of no way and saves her child, whether floating them in a basket or carrying them across a desert or placing them in a boat full of refugees or filling out enrollment paperwork with a cousin's address so they can go to a school with Chromebooks for every child instead of dog-eared, decades-old textbooks. God is surely at work whenever women or LGBTQ folks or Black or brown or indigenous folks or anyone else who has been ground under the heel of the powers that be for far too long. God is surely at work whenever people conspire to subvert a system that diminishes their humanity and holds them oppressed. God is surely at work when people of privilege understand our roles in systems of power and wield advantage not as a weapon but as a tool, and join in true solidarity in the work of transformation, whether in the palace or in the pulpit, in the classroom or in the boardroom, at home or in the streets, at a desk in a cubicle or from a seat on the Supreme Court bench. We need not wait for the invisible hand of God to reach down from above to intervene and make things right. In fact, I think divine intervention happens much more often in the form of renegade midwives, conspiracies of women, underground railroad conductors, secret attic hiding places, gay bar patrons who refuse to be raided one more time. Whenever people act with courage and conviction in the cause of justice and liberation, that is God at work. And even if we see the story this way, as purposeful and strategic rather than lucky and coincidental, there is still that moment when Moses' mother sets her child afloat on the water, releases her hold on the pitch-smeared rim of the basket, and utters a prayer to all that is holy, that the current would be kind, that the wind would be gentle, that no fallen log would snag him short of his goal, that no curious crocodile would take him for a snack, that the princess would not lose her nerve or revert to her privileged fragility. There is still that desperate, breathless, gut-twisting, heart-wrenching moment, and God is there too, whenever we must release our hold on that which is most precious. With a hug in the school parking lot, a wave through the nursing home window, a kiss at the hospital entrance, a handful of earth at the graveside. Whenever we utter a prayer to all that is holy, that our child will come home safe today, that our parent will stay COVID-free, that our spouse will make it through surgery, that our friend who suffered for so long is at home and at peace at last. God is there. God is always there, reaching across the gaps we cannot span, accompanying in the places we cannot go, holding the ones we cannot touch, breathing in us even when we cannot draw breath for ourselves, reassuring us over and over and over again. Do not fear. Do not fear. I am here. Amen.